Hello, in this session we are going to learn about custom events, which are incredibly useful things, which again, you've heard me say before, is something that I totally overlooked for the longest time, and now I can't live without them. They are very, very simple and very, very useful. Essentially, they are workflows that have a number of benefits over your regular workflows, or rather workflow triggers. So I'm going to show you 4 different examples of ways I use custom events. And then in the next session, we're going to look at using custom events and reusable elements. And when you combine the power of custom events and reusable elements, you will find that you can structure your app a lot more efficiently, and it really reduces the amount of repetition in your development, and it makes it a lot easier for you to maintain your apps. So let's get started. The first example of a custom event, which really explains basically what it is. Let's say I have a page here that students go to and decide if they want to enroll on my course. So I might have a call to action here with a start course button, and then down lower on the page I will have another call to action with a start course button. So I have 2 buttons, but effectively they do the same thing. So if we go into the editor and we look at the workflow, so this is just an example of what you might have, but if someone presses start course, it might say create a new enrollment. It might make changes to the current users so that it adds the enrollment to their list of courses that they're in. It might send an email to the course tutor to say you've got a new student. It might send an email to the student to say here's what to expect on the course. So there's 4 different workflow actions, and they are triggered from this button start course. Now we want exactly the same actions to occur when someone presses the other start course button. So we could go back here and we could start a workflow from this button, and then we could go over here and we could copy these steps one by one. A quicker way to do it would be to just right click and copy this trigger and then paste it, so that has copied and pasted the entire workflow including the trigger, and then we can just change what the trigger is. So instead of start course button, it's the start course 2 button. So there we have 2 workflows that are doing the same thing. One is triggered from one button and one is triggered from another button. Now obviously the problem with this is you are duplicating all of these steps, and if you decide you want to make a change to one of these workflows, you also have to make the same change to the other workflow. And it's quite possible that you might have a page that has 5, 6, 7 call to action buttons all doing the same thing. So you really don't want to have to make edits in 5 or 6 or 7 places, and you will definitely forget, and in the end it will be very annoying for you to maintain. So that is where custom events come in. So if I click here to add an event, just in the same way as you would add a normal trigger, so you could have when an element is clicked, or you could have when the page is loaded. If you go to custom, you can also create a custom event. All this is a workflow trigger that can be triggered from another workflow rather than from an element being clicked. So here I could say enroll student on course, and then I could go into one of these buttons and I can just copy my workflow actions from one to the other into the custom event. So now once I've done that, I can go to these 2 and I can delete all of the steps. Like that. And then for each of these buttons, I can just add one action, which is custom events, trigger a custom event. And because I only have one custom event on this page, it knows that that's the one I want to do. And then I'm just going to right click and copy this action and paste it here. So you still need the trigger actions which start the workflow. You can't just directly have a button that runs a custom event without having these triggers. So if you had 7 buttons, you would still need 7 triggers, but instead of each one having multiple steps in its workflow, each one only now has one step, which means you can make changes to this workflow here and it will update the action that occurs from all of these buttons because they are all simply triggering this custom event. So it's a really, really useful way of minimizing repetition and making it easier for you to maintain your workflows, because anytime you have workflows that are repeating, that are doing the same thing, or even parts of workflows, you can just turn them into a custom event and then trigger them from other workflows that way. Now, the second way to use custom events, let's reload this page. Imagine you have a page where you want something to happen at a certain time after the page loads or when something happens. So, for example, you want a pop-up like this to show after 5 seconds of the page loading, asking someone to join the mailing list. Now, one way of doing that would be, and in fact the way I did it on this example, I created the pop-up, and then I've got a workflow when the page is loaded, add a 5-second pause, and then show the pop-up mailing list. So that works fine, but it's not really a very elegant way to do things. I don't really like adding these kind of fixed pauses in. Another way of doing it would be to create a custom event, which is show mailing list pop-up. And in that event, we will show pop-up mailing list. And then when the page is loaded, we will remove that, and we will go to custom events, and we will schedule a custom event. So the custom event we'll schedule is show the mailing list pop-up, and then we just type in the delay we want. So in our case, we want a 5-second delay. So now if we reload the page, after 5 seconds, we should see the pop-up appear. But this time it's not done through a workflow with a pause in it, it's done through a custom event. So they're very useful for scheduling things on the page that you want to happen after a certain amount of time, because you have this ability to schedule a custom event. Now, a third way to use custom events, which I think is really, really useful, and I don't see many people talking about, but I'm sure lots of people are doing it, is that you can use it to do kind of branching logic within your workflows. That is, you can trigger custom events from within workflows, and you can kind of daisy chain your workflows together, which is not something you can do with a normal workflow. If we look at these workflows here, so when someone presses start course, or when someone presses icon menu, we cannot then trigger one of these other workflows afterwards. So we can't daisy chain these together or do any kind of logic decisions, but you can do that with custom events, which is just super, super useful. So for example, let's say when someone sees this pop up here, which is join the mailing list, they get a choice of whether to join the beginners list or the advanced list, and then they click join the list. So without any custom events, when they click that, I might have, for example, a workflow that looks a bit like this. It might create a new subscriber, then it might schedule an API workflow, which we're going to talk about in a future session, where it might schedule a workflow called beginner subscriber, which say is sending that subscriber off to an email service provider, and then it might create a new beginner onboarding. And both of these things will only be done when the radio button's value is beginner. Then later in the workflow, it might have schedule an API workflow advanced subscriber and create a new advanced onboarding. And these will only happen if radio button A's value is advanced. So we have this single workflow, which is has all these conditionals on the different events. And it's really not very easy to work out what's going on, and it's a bit cumbersome. So we could definitely improve this just by making custom events. So we could add a custom event, and we could say beginner mailing list. And so that could be, we cut that and paste it. So cut that and then paste it. And obviously imagine that in actual fact, you're going to have a lot more events than this. So it will become even more useful. Advanced mailing list, and then we can cut these, and then we can clear these conditionals. So what we are making is a kind of branching logic of our workflows, and I have seen workflows where there's 10 or more custom events strung together, all starting based on conditionals. So in this workflow here, we can have create a new subscriber because that's common to both of them, but then we can say trigger a custom event, and we can say advanced mailing list only when radio buttons A's value is advanced, and beginner mailing list only when radio button A's value is beginner. And then obviously we could have a lot more steps in this workflow, but as long as those are common steps to anyone who joins the mailing list, but it will still have this branching logic for advanced and beginner mailing list, which will then trigger these custom events. And then these workflows could be much longer, and they could also have branching logic, which goes off into more custom events. So custom events are very useful for simplifying the kind of complex logic that you might have in a super long workflow and breaking it down into smaller workflows, which are much easier to maintain and debug. Okay, so this one is going to blow your mind, okay? Custom events in reusable elements can be triggered from outside the reusable element, unlike regular workflows. Okay, so just to explain what that means, I have on this page a header, and that header is a reusable element. So if I go into edit element, you can see this header here, and the sign up button in this header has a workflow which shows the pop-up sign up login. However, so if I go to this page and I click the button, the sign up pop-up shows up. However, if I had on this page another button that says sign up, there is no way for me to trigger this workflow within the reusable element from outside the reusable element. In fact, there would be no way for me to trigger that workflow even if it was just on our page. As we've seen before, I would need to make either a separate workflow to show that pop-up, or I would need to make a custom event. However, if we go to our header and we create a custom event, and we can cut this and we'll put that in this custom event, and then we can just trigger it from that button. So the button will still work, but on our page we can also go down to this button and we can say add workflow, and we can trigger a custom event from a reusable element. So the only reusable element I have on the page is header A, and the custom event, there's only one custom event in header A, so it's guessed exactly what I want to do. So that means that if I reload the page, I can now show the sign up pop-up from there, but I can also show it from here. So although it may not seem that useful with this example, this is actually incredibly useful because it means that you can have reusable elements in your app that have all your important workflows or all your workflows relating to one particular thing stored in that reusable element. And it may be the header, it may be that you have all your important or useful workflows in the header of your website, and so because it's on every page, then anywhere on that page or anywhere on any of the pages in your site, you can trigger those workflows. Likewise, you might have simply a 1x1 pixel element which you drop onto every page, which has all of your workflows relating to, for example, sending emails and things like that. So say, for example, you have multiple calls to action throughout your app, asking people if they want to upgrade, and if they click on a button or an icon, then it will show them a pop-up and enable them to upgrade. So all of the workflows relating to upgrading can be stored in one single reusable element, which may or may not contain the pop-up as well. And you can just drop that onto every page so that from everywhere on your website, anytime you want to show someone the upgrade pop-up, you can just trigger it by having that reusable element on the page and by triggering the custom event from that reusable. And I know for a fact that some of the top bubble agencies use this technique extensively throughout their apps to reduce the amount of workflows and repetition within their app. So this is another example of custom events just coming in and saving the day. Okay, and the fifth example, and I think I said there were going to be four, but there's actually five, so that's good. The fifth example of when you can use custom events, this one is slightly more niche, but it is still useful. It's not something I've really used much before, but it's definitely worth knowing about. So let's say, for example, on our course page, we have the option to start the course, but we also have a button that says email the tutor. And if you click it, you can type a message and you can send it, and that will go to the tutor. So let's imagine, or let's see in this example, when you click that button, it shows the pop-up email tutor, and then on the pop-up, when you click send, it starts a workflow which creates a new message in the database, and obviously this would have body field, which would be equal to the multi-line inputs value, and then it hides the pop-up and it shows you an alert to say message sent. Okay, so let's just do that. Okay, message sent says up there. So that's all fine, but what if you wanted to see an alert to say the message has been read by the tutor? So one way to do that is to create a custom event called message read, and then we are going to show an alert that says your message has been read. And there is one more thing we need to do to this custom event, and that is to add a new parameter. So custom events are really useful additionally because they can take parameters, which means basically you can pass any data you want to between them using these parameters. So in our case, we want to pass the specific message that we're going to be watching through to this. So if I make a parameter, and I'm just calling it message, and the type is going to be message because I think that will be clearest. So that means when we use this trigger, so this is going to be on the button send. So they press send, it creates a new message, it hides the pop-up and shows them this alert to say the message has been sent. Next, we want to go to custom events and use trigger a custom event when data changes. And here it asks us which custom event would you like to trigger. So we want message read. Now, because we have a parameter here, it gives us this option of thing to watch. So we can say the thing it's expecting here is going to be a message because our parameter here is message. So we can say we want to watch the result of step 1, which is the message we've created at the beginning of this workflow. And the field on that message we want to watch is red, which is the yes or no field, which will change when the tutor reads it. So once we've done this, it will then trigger this kind of database trigger, which will in turn trigger this custom event when this message, which we've created here, is marked as read. So then it just comes down to how are we going to mark that message as read when the tutor has looked at it, and there could be a number of ways. We could have an interface on another page where the tutor can read their messages and it either automatically marks it as read when the page is loaded, or they press a button to say I've read this message, or it could be kind of an email tracking pixel in their email which then marks it as read. So whatever way it does it, this just enables us to make real-time updates on the page when something happens. So in order to test that, let's email the tutor. I'm going to say new message. It says message sent there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this out of the screen so we can continue looking at this page, and I'm going to go into the database and I'm going to make an update to that message to say that it's been read. Okay, so I'm saving that now. And there we got this pop-up to say your message has been read. So this trigger will respond to any update to that field on that message, whether it's done from the back end or from the front end by another user. When that field is changed, then it will trigger that custom event on our page. And as you can see, this is how I did it. I just went into the database and edited this to be read as yes. So as I said, this is a fairly kind of niche way of doing things, and there are other ways of triggering things based on database changes, but it's worth knowing that you can do that with custom events because you never know when it's going to come in handy. So I hope that's been a good introduction to custom events. They are really powerful, and in the next session we're going to go through some more examples of how to combine custom events and reusable elements to massively improve the efficiency of your apps and reduce the amount of work it is to maintain them.